Hello and welcome back to the Rambling On podcast, episode 2, and hopefully the first of many in the Lord's year of 2024. Now, I listened back to my first episode and there were a few things that I didn't like about it, such as the speed at which I was speaking, the number of breaks which I was taking, how close I was to the microphone for some segments of it. I thought I was a bit too close. And also the platform I recorded it on wasn't great. So I've done a few changes. I've sort of adjusted the distance. I've tried to measure out where would be a good distance to have the microphone so that it's that Goldilocks distance. So you can't hear everything that happens when I speak, but it's still loud enough and it doesn't echo too much. But as I mentioned before, this is very much still a work in progress. And I feel like every episode that I record, the aim at least is to try and get better with maybe not so much the equipment using, but the platforms using, how I edit the videos. I'm trying to do as little editing as possible simply because of the time. I don't even know how a lot of these more popular podcasts do it. I suspect they probably have someone. Well, in fact, I do know they have someone to edit all this stuff out. Obviously, I don't have that time or the resources because no one's actually listening to this apart from me. So I will have to see how I get on by myself. And like I said before, hopefully, eventually this gets better. So as I said in the last topic, very important one, very relevant, very important, very relevant. But as I also mentioned, the nature of this podcast will be that I will be speaking about a number of different things that are completely unrelated and not necessarily things that are taking place in the news. So with that being said, this week's episode is about universities and more specifically the university system in the UK and why I think that universities are no longer fit for purpose to serve the students and the young professionals in the workplace today. Now, in recent months, I've spoken to a lot of people in school who have been considering either going to university or doing another career path, whether that's going into full-time job or doing an apprenticeship. But naturally, of course, at that age, you're not entirely sure what you want to do yet. And the default, I think, for students is to go to university because they are essentially buying time. They don't know what to do. They're buying time, and hopefully in those 3 years, they'll figure out what they want to do. And for some people, they will, find what they're passionate about, and they will find that in university possibly, or they might pick a subject and realize they don't like it, and they find out what they're not passionate about, which is equally as important. But for a lot of students, they end up falling into a job that they probably would have fallen into anyway if they didn't go to university. And with that, I think it's important for young people to realise, and actually everyone really to realise, that you don't need to go to university, and there are plenty of other options out there that could be explored, and if not, should be explored. But anyway, I digress. The point of this is really to highlight a lot of the flaws of the modern university system that we have that exists in the UK, and a lot of this will actually translate into other university systems around the world, but because I've been through the system in the UK, I'm a lot more familiar with it. I cannot speak extensively about how it works in other countries, but there will be parallels that can be drawn. But before we go into the boring part about the university system in the UK, let's dive a bit into about the histories of universities around the globe, as I am such a stickler for historical context. So if we want to go back to the first university, we will end up in Bologna in Italy in roughly 1088 AD. And this year is widely considered to be sort of the birth of the world's first university, or at least universities as we know them today. So the establishment of this university, this academic institution, is largely accredited to a group of scholars and students who had a common goal of essentially creating a place of learning and intellectual exchange. So I say academic institution, or that's what really I should call it, because this wasn't the first time any form of physical building had been used as a place of education. Teachings and other places of learning had been around for centuries before. If we think of things like monasteries, where monks would go and learn about the Bible, or philosophers who would teach their students their own philosophies. And I think the best example of that would be Socrates, who taught Plato, who taught Aristotle, who then taught Alexander the Great. So you definitely have plenty of examples of places of learning that were taking place in buildings. And you could argue that maybe they were possibly universities, but in terms of universities as we know them today, the university in Italy, in Bologna, is sort of considered to be the first one. Now, I did a bit more research and I did see that there is a slight caveat to this point, because there is a university in Fez in Morocco, which does actually hold the title of the oldest existing and continually operating educational institution in the world. But note, they say educational institution and not university. And I think because at the time it wasn't technically considered a university, but a place of learning. But, I don't want to get into this unnecessary pedantic details of what could be classed as a university 100 years ago and what wasn't. So, onwards. Now we skip a few decades on from Bologna, and we find ourselves in a still fairly freshly conquered England in 1096. William the Conqueror had died, and his heir, William Rufus, or William II, still got a few more years left as king before he calls it a day. But in similar fashion to Bologna, and also probably taking some inspiration, from tales in continental Europe, there were a group of scholars who were seeking refuge from political turmoil, and they'd started teaching in Oxford. Now, although the exact founding date of the university is unknown, it's widely considered to be 1096, as this is when teaching in Oxford, in the city, had first started. And obviously, over the centuries, that has evolved into what it is today. So, that's the brief history of universities, the first one, and the first one in the UK. So now let's move on to the finer details. So a good place to start, I thought, was how many universities are there in the UK alone? And according to Universities UK, a website that is sort of like a spokesperson for universities, in the year 2021-2022, there were 285 higher education providers in the UK who had submitted information to the Higher Education Statistics Agency. I don't entirely know what this means, why they're saying, those who submitted. I think it could possibly mean that there are more, but I think let's just stick with that figure of 285 in the UK. I think as well, there probably, is some form of divergence between a university and other institutions where you can learn at a high level, maybe like a foundation degree or something. Not too sure. So let's just, for argument's sake, say they're 285, because that seems to be the most consistent and most accurate. So with that, naturally then, I think it sort of begs the question of how many students are in the UK. And still from Statistics UK, I found that in 21-22, again that same year cycle, there were 2,182,560 students studying at UK higher education providers, again universities essentially. 1.7 million of those were undergraduates and 444,000 were postgraduates. So the vast majority of university obviously being the undergraduates, but 2.1 1 million, almost 2.2 million, is a lot of students. And that age range will be from, I think, there are obviously these outlier exceptions, but I think generally the ages will be from 17 onwards. There's no real upper limit of universities. I do wonder who the oldest university student is, who's currently studying or has been in the past. But yeah, roughly from 17, let's say maybe to, I think the oldest I came across was 42. But it definitely can go beyond that. So the higher education sector actually generates a lot more income than I thought it did. So still from the university's UK website, in terms of income, I found that in, again, the year 2020 to 2021, the total income for the higher education sector was £43.9 billion. And this is sort of made up from a number of different sources. So tuition fees and education contracts, which I guess is the fees that the students pay, that is 23.5 billion. So just over half of their fees comes from simply tuition fees, and that's a figure that I want you to sort of park that and remember that, because we'll sort of circle back around on that later on. Funding body grants, 6 billion. So universities get a number of grants from governments for like research or other things. And funnily enough, I say research because research grants and contracts was 6.5 billion. Investment income was 0.3 billion. Donations and endowments 0.8 billion, and other income was 6.8 billion. So 43.9 billion. A lot of money, a big sector for the UK. Given the nature of the UK as it is, tuition fees are not like a flat rate across all 4 home nations, and they vary from country to country. But interestingly, the cost only varies by country and not by individual universities, because for the most part, universities are all public institutions. The private ones will obviously charge more, whatever they want, but so for the majority of them, it's a flat fee. It just depends on what country they're in the UK. So in England, university is £9,250. In Wales, it's £9,000. In Northern Ireland, it's £4,710 for Northern Irish students, or for any other UK students studying in Northern Ireland, it's £9,250. For Scotland, it's free for the majority of Scottish students staying in the UK. Scottish students studying in Scotland, but for any other students outside of Scotland from the UK, it's £9,250. So you've got that range there from free to £9,250. But the prices there will be exceptions, and prices will change, and private universities may charge a bit more. And I think London universities charge more prices again. But it's fairly standard. Now, accommodation fees, they can obviously vary even more, since the cost of housing in different cities varies so massively, and unless you're student accommodation, you're more of at the whim of a private landlord. So it's very difficult to get an average for that. But if we sort of combine university fees and accommodation together, we can estimate a cost of tuition fees and accommodation for universities in the UK. And in England, it's £49,887. In Wales, it's £45,494. In Northern Ireland, it's £32,091. And in Scotland, it's £27,775. Now, obviously, that is an average of over the 3 years of university, and not the 4, and not 1, because that would just be a ludicrous amount of money. But even then, we can see that for those 3 years alone, that's a big cost for any student. I mean, that's a big cost for any person, anyone even working now. So it's a massive financial commitment, and for you to be 22, 23, coming out of university and having that much debt, it's a lot. And even at the lowest band for Scotland, Scotland is the lowest band by a long shot, and £27,000, basically £28,000. That's a lot of money. So when you look at university solely from a numerical perspective, there should be high expectations about what this degree can offer you. And I think you should really consider all other options. It's certainly now, looking at those figures now, I would definitely think, well, is university worth it for me? But I think it's a decision that not many young people contemplate much, partly because they just don't view university purely from a numerical or financial perspective, understandably. Realistically, not many people that age are thinking like this. And why should they? Because they're not working full-time jobs, they don't pay tax, they're not getting paid, they're not having to pay rent. So understandably, that kind of thinking isn't even on their radar. So I think it'd be very unique for a 17-year-old to have that thought process, and I think it would be unfair for us to expect them to have that. And I think I'd argue, at least, that a large part of any real lack of deliberation derives from the fact that at that age, and I recall this from experience, both personally and also what I've heard other people say, we're told that university is just the thing to do, especially if you want to get a good job. Just go to university. And teenagers, being as young as they are still, even though they might think they're very mature, they're still very young, their brain's still developing. They're naturally influenced by people older than them. And also beyond that, I think it's a societal norm to go to university. It's like almost everyone goes to university. Maybe 2 generations ago, university was seen as it's like a privilege, or not a privilege, but maybe for a certain amount of individual with a certain amount of intelligence. But now it's just like, everyone goes. So it's definitely very normal, very common for you to go to university. And I think, those 2 factors alone are one of the main reasons why people just jump into that 3-year commitment, at least 3 years. But I do think that most people that come out of university, and even if they were to look at those figures again, you would go, God, I really wish I thought about it that way. If you were to do something else and the costs were that high, you would think, is this really worth it? Because that's a huge commitment. The average person is not paying that off anytime soon. So, but because it's just not on their horizon, I don't think students think like that necessarily, and understandably so. So as we heard before with the statistics, there are a lot of students that go to university. But then, of course, you have those that do not go, and they will follow another path to get to progress in whatever career. Some may get an apprenticeship, which is certainly growing, or maybe some don't even do that, and they go to college and they learn a trade, or they just, who knows? There are many facets in life in which you can sort of find your own way. But the apprenticeship is something I just want to touch on, because I think there is a large misconception about them. Certainly when I was in high school, and the idea of apprenticeship is that if you don't go to university, you'll do an apprenticeship, and if you do an apprenticeship, it's mainly to do, a physical labour job. And I think this is a misconception, because I think it's based on something that's quite old. Because you can get apprenticeships, and I only recently, well, I say recently, wasn't before it was too late. I was in university that I realised that you could actually apply for apprenticeships in banks and asset managers, etc., and other businesses, whether it's, I don't know, an airline or a supermarket. There's so many out there. But there was, at least when I was in school, a misconception that it's kind of university or apprenticeship, and the apprenticeships are for, if you want to be a plumber or another similar job. And I do think it's changing in universities now. It's not in schools now. It's not so much like that anymore. There is certainly more focus from the teachers. The teachers are introducing this a lot more to the students earlier on, but there is definitely still that legacy of university being the better option than apprenticeships. And I'd wager that this is probably another reason why students pick universities, sort of blindly, because they view apprenticeships as the lesser option of the two. So I'll come back to universities later in this, more as when I talk about the solutions. But when we think about this cost that I just mentioned before, those costs are massive. And of course, not everyone could afford such costs. And as such, students can take out loans if they want to. And indeed, most do take out loans. I did myself. So how the loans work in the UK is, well, there are two types, but as with most things in the UK, especially things that are publicly run or publicly organised, it's very complicated. But there are two types of main loans that you can go apply for in university, and that's the maintenance loan and the tuition fee loan. So the maintenance loan is paid directly to the student, and the intention of it is to cover the cost of accommodation, food, books, and other, university-related essentials. Maybe, possibly a laptop, or something else you need for university that most students need. Vodka, for example. The loan for the tuition fees are paid directly to the university, and so this is the other type of loan, and the intention of the tuition fee loan is to equal the cost of your course up to a maximum of 9,250, which is the cost of the upper limit you pay for a course. So those are the two loans, and most people are entitled to a tuition loan. For the majority are, whereas maintenance loan, that's essentially means tested based on your income. But the maximum you can get for a maintenance loan in England is 9,978. In London, it's 13,022. This is what I mean about London being more expensive. In Scotland, the maximum is 8,000. In Wales, it's 10,720, and in Northern Ireland, it's 6,776. So, the fee and loan system is not that simple, and there are conditions where people can get more or less money. It varies massively, and also some people are entitled to grants, and instead of loans. But anyway, these details are very irrelevant and, frankly, even more boring. So, what this essentially means, with these loans, is that individuals who are going to universities or families who are helping their children plan to go to universities don't have to bear the high cost of university if they don't have the money. And a lot of families don't. And the student can take out a loan which will cover their fees and a good chunk of their living expenses, as we've sort of covered. For some, once they're in university, a part-time job may well be needed, or possibly support from their parents as a supplementary income. If they're fortunate enough to come from an economic background where their parents can do that. But I would wager that most university students have needed some form of supplementary income, whether they work it themselves or whether they get that support from their family. Now, I tried to find some statistics on the number of courses in the UK, because I thought that was the next thing to do now that we've done how many universities, how many students, because there are a lot of students. So I tried to find some statistics on the number of courses in the UK, whether that was, the average number of courses offered or just the total number, but I couldn't find much. I think just because there are so many. I don't really know. Generally in the UK, we're quite good at recording things. We record a lot of stuff. I think that's really been a thing since the Normans invaded. The Normans came over and they had the famous Doomsday Book, and ever since then we've just recorded things. But surprisingly, it probably is out there somewhere, but I can't find it. Anyway, so I couldn't find anything. So what I decided to do is I looked at the university with the highest number of students, and then I had a look at the courses from there. So the university with the highest number of students, if anyone knows, say it out loud now, try and guess, but it's the University of Manchester, and they have a whopping 40,485 pupils across all levels, so whether that's undergraduate, postgraduate, doctorate, etc. So I just had a look on their list of all possible subjects that one could apply for, and there were 489 different options. Now a lot of these, now that is a lot, but a lot of these will have large crossovers with each other, and by that I mean if you apply to study history and politics, that's one subject, but then you might study history and international relations. So those are two different subjects, but they both entail history. You may be doing the exact same history courses as someone else, but you're doing a slightly different secondary degree there. So that number sounds like a lot, but it's probably, in terms of completely separate courses, it isn't that much, but they don't have details for that. So let's just go with 489, because on your enrollment sheet or when you go through the matriculation in your enrollment, there will be different options. So I think that's fair enough to say 489 different options. So let's just pretend for a moment that we're all students. If we're listening, if you are a student already, then let's pretend that you're just about to start. Or if you're not a student, let's just pretend that we are. So we're a student and we've just finished X amount of years in university. Probably 3, but depending on what you studied, could be more. And now we're searching for a job, or hopefully we're searching for a job. And we're searching for a job based in the field where you did your degree. But as you're doing that, you consider the fact that your degree has cost you between £27,000 and £49,000. And you took that degree you studied that degree based on the idea that you will be better off than others who do not have a degree, both now when you are applying for university and in the future in terms of earnings. That's the main idea about university, right? You go there, you upskill, so that once you are applying for jobs and you get a job, both once you get the job and in the future, you are already ahead of those who didn't go to university because you upskilled and now you have the essential skills that would allow you to earn more money. And that might be the case. However, there is one caveat to that point. Because remember, financial isn't just about the money you are making now. It's also about your net worth, what you own, how much you owe, etc. So the caveat to that point is this. You've got that degree and you're hopefully going to earn more money. Great. However, you're now in between £27,000 and £49,000 worth of debt. And you're only probably 23 years old. So then, once you consider the amount of debt that you've got, and then knowing that you'll have to pay that debt off in the future, and you'll still be better off than people, because remember, you have to sort of subtract that, pay that off, and still be better off. Otherwise, university was not even worth it. You're actually worse off, right? So, considering all that, you then must, the question begs, wow, I actually must be projected to earn a lot more than those who didn't go to university, given the amount of debt that I have accrued to achieve this degree, and I'll still be better off than the majority of people. So I want to unpack that a bit more and go into the more finer details about whether you actually are better off or not, and what the average person comes out of university with. So, as per the data from the Higher Education Statistics Agency, so very reputable, the average salary of an individual who obtained a degree was £27,340, 15 months after graduation, which is about £3,000 less than the median average of between people working between the age of 22 and 29, and that's per the ONS. So obviously within that 22 and 29 will be people who have graduated already. But 50 months after graduation, on average, you're earning less than the average wage in general. So it doesn't look fantastic, off the bat for people graduating from university. But just that statistic alone does not mean to say that university is a bad choice. Far from it, in fact. So a study published in 2020 found that the average lifetime net gain in earnings, and this is also discounting for taxes and student loan repayments, for men is £130,000 and for women £100,000. So if we refer back to what I said before about, even after you've paid everything off, will you be better off? And this is what this statistic is essentially saying, that yes, you are. Men, you are £130,000, discounting for taxes and student loan, and £100,000 women. So those two figures are definitely a substantial amount of money for the majority of people. However, this is over your lifetime. So spread that over the entirety of your lifetime, or let's say a typical working lifetime of an undergraduate employee, and that's roughly 43 years from retirement. That's retirement until 65, which may well change soon, from roughly 23. If you average that out, it means that a year it's an extra £3,023, which again is decent, on top of as a salary. I always like to picture this. Why don't you take that away from current salary? Then you'll kind of realize, is that a lot of money? And yes, it is, but it's not a huge amount. For all that, just for an extra £3,000 a year, it's not massive. But interestingly, in that study, one of the more important things that is a driving factor in these figures is the subject studied. So the lifetime gains in earnings for a woman who studied creative arts or languages are next to zero. Whereas for a man, it's actually a negative financial return. Whereas if a woman studied law, medicine, or economics, the net gains are £250,000. And if a man studied those same subjects, the gains would be £500,000. So huge differences in terms of the impact of the core study. However, these gains are actually not, as you can imagine, they're not very common. These are reserved for the very few outliers who earn a lot of money. Whereas the negative gains, that's very common. So you've got, on the one side, you've got outliers who earn loads of money, but for the vast majority, it's not that. And then you've got, on the flip side, those who study the creative arts, they're either worse off or no better off, more or less. So obviously people, they won't benefit anywhere near as much from university as those figures. That is like a best case scenario. Alternatively, if we look at careers that are maybe sort of in the middle between great gains and losses, and these are jobs that are probably some of the more popular jobs in the UK, so education, nursing, another one. The returns on average are low, and this is all from the website. The returns on average are low, but are higher for women than they are for men. Now, those statistics there definitely spark another debate about pay discrepancies in gender, but that's definitely for another time. So, continuing on. As per the findings of that same study, roughly 1 in 5, or 20%, or based on the number of students, around 70,000 students a year would be financially better off if they never went to university. As for the rest, there are financial gains on average. But if you're not doing a degree like economics, finance, medicine, law, or maybe another STEM subject, engineering, your gains become a lot slimmer. So overall success for students in terms of financial gains post-university can be quite dubious. So we saw before that the average was £100,000, but this average is very much so skewed by top earners. It's similar to in China, for example, where there are very, very, very wealthy people, and they may well bring up the average income of China. But if you were to statistically be in China, the chances are you are probably going to be a lot poorer than you are wealthy. And that's sort of like it's not a fantastic analogy. I'm just thinking of one off the top of my head, but even though the average is this, the reality of it is that average is probably being made up by the outliers. So, with that being said, I think the next thing to ask is, well, what about the cost to the wider society? What does everyone else have to pay? Is there a cost for us? And according to an article from The Guardian, which, by the way, may be the first time I've actually gotten something useful from The Guardian. Well, first or second. Outstanding student loan debt in England alone surpassed £200 billion in 2023, which, by the way, had doubled in just 6 years. So 6 years ago, it was 100 billion. In just 6 years' time, it's doubled to 200 billion. And this is actually 20 years earlier than what the government had forecasted. So it says a lot about government forecasts, first of all. And a nice comparison, I think, a funny comparison that I tried to draw here. A lot of people in the UK will complain about the cost of the monarchy in the UK. And, I think it's a fair argument. There is a large cost that the Treasury has to incur to fund the royal family on their various trips. Again, another debate, but, it's a significant cost. So let's say that complaint is understandable. The outstanding debt, which is debt that has not been repaid, of student loans would be the equivalent of funding the royal family 2,317 times every year if the total sovereign grant, which is an estimation of what it costs, the royal family costs the public, if that is an accurate representation of the actual cost. That, just an interesting comparison. Now, obviously, the argument against that is, well, what's more important, educating the future generations or, funding a royal family? So, that's a very, very, very valid argument. Not a debate we're going to get into now, but it's just something that I found quite interesting. Now, of course, that the debt, it's outstanding, but it's being repaid, right? Because that's what happened. It's any debt that you instantly accrue is instantly outstanding. So it looks bad, but it is being repaid. However, the flip side of that is, yes, it's being repaid, but in 6 years, it's doubled. It's constantly increasing. So consider that from a personal financial perspective. If you've got debt and the bank says to you, right, you've got this amount of debt, it's huge, fix it. And you're like, yeah, but look, I'm paying it off every month. And you're paying £100 off every month. And they go, right, yeah, that might be well and good that you're paying £100 a month. But every month, for every £100 you pay off, it's growing by £200 or £200 more or £200. So you are paying it off, but it's still growing. So it's not going anywhere and it's going to get worse. And that's what's happening. So it means actually that the taxpayer is covering the losses because, well, we'll get into why, but that's what it means. It means the taxpayer is paying for this. So now, some people might listen to this and think, well, hang on, what does this have to do with anything? Why is this related to the taxpayer in any way, shape or form? University students go to university on their own accord, they take out a loan, and they repay it, which is true. So, hang on, where did the people come into this? And the loans the students get are from the student loan company. So, where is the involvement of the public? It's not like you're forced to go to university. It's a choice. If you were to buy a car or a house, you take out a mortgage, you repay that yourself. There's no cost incurred by the public. If you get a car on finance, you might take out a loan, or you could take out a loan for a number of different things, but you repay it yourself. There's no cost incurred to the public. So why are the taxpayer covering this? So the loans that the students get, what makes them so special? So the loans that the students get are from a company called the Student Loan Company. Very original. Avoids all confusion. So you apply, you get a loan, and off you pop to university for 3 years of socialising, networking, drinking, and occasional hours of studying. Which is, I'd say, an accurate representation of what university is like. Come the end of education and the start of their working career, hopefully, they repay the loan. But according to government forecasts, again, how much we want to trust this, I don't know. But this, however, is based off of previous repayments and the current state of it now. So according to their forecast, only 27% of full-time undergraduates who started in 22-23 will repay these loans in full. 27%, I'll repeat that, 27% of university students, undergrads, will repay the loan in full. So any of you who have, a hint of business acumen will hear that and wonder, right, well, who's this student loan company, and what sort of idiotic business plan is this, and how the hell has it lasted for so long? Who's even funding this company? Who owns it? Like, what's going on here? How is that? How is the worst business plan ever made by a man actually been still? How is it still running? Well, the answer is, of course, it's the government. The government actually loans the money to students, who will then pay the university. In fact, it goes into the student account, but it kind of just goes straight to the university. The student loan company is a tiny bit misleading, because it's not. It's a company, it's an entity, but it's not a private entity. It's the government. And so the government, it goes through the student, although they don't touch it, and it goes straight to the university. That's for the tuition loan, not for the maintenance loan. The maintenance loan is for the student, the tuition loan goes straight to the university. And I think this makes a lot more sense now that you think about it. Only the public sector would be able to lose that much money and continue to operate. There's no way in hell that would survive in the business world for any length of time, especially obviously you get businesses that are not profitable. A lot of tech companies now are not profitable because what they are is they're funded by private companies based on the fact that they'll earn great earnings in the future. Now eventually those get caught out and they fall under the waistline. But as a bank who's loaning money, if your loans, if you're roughly 75% of your loans are not coming through, you're not going to last long at all. Now, thankfully, under the new reforms that have recently been introduced, they forecast that the amount of loans that will be repaid in full will increase to 61%. Again, government forecast. Unsure how effective and accurate they'll be, but I suspect that it's not very difficult to encourage people or make people repay more of their loan. It's very simple. You just charge more interest, or you, charge them earlier. So that's increased it a lot, more than doubled it. Still very unprofitable, still highly unprofitable, and completely unworkable in a real business environment or banking environment, but just less so than it was before. Again, as they predict. Government predictions have a fantastic history of being horribly wrong. So we'll see about that. So it costs the taxpayer a lot of money to finance university degrees for students, especially because the loan typically isn't paid back. Now, I'm going to refer back to that study before that I mentioned about the net gain of students. And according to that study, there actually is an increase in tax revenue from university students. Overall, they estimate that the expected gain to the exchequer of an individual enrolling in an undergraduate course is around £110,000 per student. So basically the government gets that on average per student. For men, so £110,000 for men per student and 30k per woman per student. On paper, it sounds like they are, gaining money from that. But that statistic is mainly influenced by the fact that a lot of people just aren't repaying their loans, so those will be wiped off, and then that debt just gets wiped off. So not entirely accurate. But even then, the gains that are made are only really made by the highest earners. The study estimates that the Treasury gain more than 500,000 overall from the top 10% of graduates, whereas they'll make a 40% loss from men and a 50% loss from women. So which means that roughly almost half of all students receive a net government subsidy for their degrees, even after tax and national insurance contributions have been taken into account. So only the high earners will really, one, make university worth it for themselves and have a net gain, and two, pay off their debts and have a positive contribution, have a positive financial contribution to the government. So I think the question now is, why are there so many defaults on UK university student debt? Like, what is the reason that only 25% is paid off? We know that's the case, but why is that the case? So the terms of the loan repayments have changed a lot over the years. Even from when I was thinking about going to university and I was looking into all this, it's sort of changed again. I do know that it used to be that if you moved outside the EU, for example, you didn't need to repay your loan at all. Now, obviously, that changed when Brexit, the Brexit vote went ahead, and obviously the transition period. But I think that change sort of coincided with the Brexit vote. Up until very recently, you only had to start repaying your loan once you were earning over, I believe, £25,000, and it was only a small portion of your loan that you had to repay off. And the idea behind that is the higher or the more you earn, the more you pay, right? That makes sense. But if after 30 years you hadn't paid off your debt, at which case, roughly 75% hadn't, your debt gets wiped. So after 30 years, even if you're comfortable earning good money, you could be earning, £200,000 a year, very comfortable, more than comfortable actually, but you've just hit year 30 and your debt just gets wiped. And so, looking at that, I think there are two main problems. But so that's one of the reasons why so many debts aren't paid off. And that's because people, essentially, when you think about that, people are clearly not earning enough in those 30 years to pay off their loan. So they don't have to, if they haven't paid it off in 30 years, they don't have to. 75% of people, roughly, are not paying off their loan in full, which means that in those 30 years, you are not earning enough, or you haven't earned enough to even have paid off the loan. So to me, I think there are two glaringly obvious problems with this. One is that the apparent benefits that you get from university aren't enough for the average person to pay off their loan. And two, the repayment system is FUD. And I would argue that both are actually true. Both of those things are true. The repayment system's silly, and also people aren't earning enough. So regarding the findings from that study that found that people were better off on average, I do wonder by how much that value would be reduced if people were forced to pay off all their debt. So you don't wipe it after 30 years. You will repay that until it gets paid off. I suspect that the average, even considering those who are the higher earners, gets brought down by a lot more. I did try and have a look at if 75% of people were not paying it off, what is the average amount that people do pay off? Now, I couldn't find anything on that, unfortunately. I think that may require a bit more research into, or maybe it hasn't been looked into, and one of those things where we just won't have that until maybe the ONS decide to publish that information, but unfortunately that wasn't there. But as I alluded to before with the UK and just things to do with the government and public institutions, the repayment plans are not that simple. And as I said as well, the government plans are actually changing. They're changing how they want to charge their repayment plans, so that ideally a lot more people will repay the loan in principle. So taking a step back, to looking at the wider image of everything that I've just said here, this effectively means that universities are government funded, right? Because the students get the loans from the government, which goes straight into the university's account. I mean, how it works is, it comes into your account, you get the notification, you see it, and it goes off again straight away. And so, even though universities are public institutions, and this is the key thing, they are public institutions, which means that they are actually, they're not privately owned, they're run by the public. But for universities to be entirely government funded is a massive, massive, massive cost on the taxpayer. Now, I would argue that it's no secret that, well, it may be a slight secret, that teaching in universities is no longer the main priority of universities. Now, that sounds very incorrect and counterintuitive, because university is there to teach. It's higher education. They are there to teach. How can the primary goal of universities not be teaching? Well, that's just sort of one of those unofficial hard truths, because it's not. The main goal of university now is research. That's where they get loads of funding from. That's where these university lecturers get their name isn't propelled into academia through being a good teacher. The name is put out there through their research or maybe their publications. A lot of them, and I've actually spoken to PhD students who obviously have access to lecturers, and they've said that a lot of lecturers view teaching as a burden, right? So let that sink in for a minute, because that means effectively that with teaching students not even being the main focus of universities, in their view, students are just a method of receiving more funding from the government, right? Because they think, right, well, all we want to do, or ideally what we want to do, is do more research, maybe do some publications, get our name out there, that's where the big money comes in, from the publications. You get your thing published and maybe you can write a book, or maybe you get, hired to do some research and then you get hired by the company. So that's where the big money is made for the lecturers. So teaching students, they don't want to teach these, bratty teens or early 20-year-old students. That's just a nonsense. And in a way, I can't really blame them, because even with my experience in university, a lecturer would ask you, the students, a question. And you would think at university people are there to engage because they're there by choice. It's not like high school or secondary school where you're forced to be there. It's mandated that you're there, so you have no choice. In university, it's completely your choice. You go there, and the teacher asks a question. The lecturer asks a question. Open floor. What do you think about this? And obviously not every subject, not every university, but a lot of universities, and certainly the one I went to, which was a Russell Group, just dead silence. Dead silence. So in a way, I can't entirely blame lecturers for not enjoying teaching, especially when students aren't engaging. But to think that a university as a whole, teaching or lecturing is like a secondary priority is it's crazy, I think. So yeah, they view students as a way, of getting more funding. So now some people may hear this and, the cogs may be turning, especially for these deans of presidents of universities. Well, if we can just basically get more, how do we get more money? How do we get more funding, right? How do we get, without having to do all the hard work of, maybe more research, etc. What's an easy way to get more funding? Well, you offer more courses, because the more students you get, the more funding you get. And also, the more the government provides the students, the higher the prices of the universities. That's sort of generally how it goes. Universities increase their prices and the loans increase, and so on and so forth. And the more students come in, so they offer more courses. But it gets to a point where, classes are going to get too big. You can't have university lecture halls are already huge. So to overcome that issue, you could say, why don't they just have 3 different business courses? Which I think is very ineffective. So what the other thing that's been happening is we've seen over the past 20, 30 years, 40 years plus, is that it's not necessarily that the classes, the lecture halls have gotten bigger, it's that they've offered a wider variety of courses. Now think back to what I said about the University of Manchester. So they offered a lot of courses. And this is good in a way, because there are some fields that have come up, and rightly so, you need to go to university. If you think of new technologies now, 30 years ago or 40 years ago or 50 years ago, there weren't any university courses about IT, or the very few courses about IT or coding, for example, or computer science. None of that. But there are now, and obviously that's needed. But universities have offered a lot of courses, and quite frankly, a lot of stupid courses. And the way I see this, I kind of view this is a bit of a tongue-in-cheek, humour. But it's not too dissimilar from, drug dealers using businesses to wash their money. Students are essentially the laundromats or the bureau de changes, because, like top drug dealers, the universities actually make a lot of money, and, a way to sort of get, this is where it's different, but obviously, universities use the students as proxies to get more. And in drug dealers' case, they might use something else as a proxy. But anyway, but on that topic of universities making a lot of money, I thought, well, we've seen how much the industry makes, the higher education industry, but why don't we look at what the most profitable university in the UK is? Now, I tried to find this, and difficult to find because there were some terms that I didn't fully understand. very these academic terms of where they get their money from. So for those familiar with the TAB, or those not familiar with the TAB, it's like a university publication. It's run by students, I think, or maybe like former students. I don't really know how it works. But it's been quite popular amongst like British universities. They post like funny articles, etc. According to the TAB, in the year 2019-2020, the most profitable university in the UK was, you could probably guess, the University of Oxford, making £390 million in profit. Not revenue, profit. And the lowest on the list, at number 20, there was like a list of 20, and the lowest on the list was the University of Lancaster, was £54 million profit. Now, I mean, I don't know. I definitely want to do more digging to sort of confirm that figure, because that 390 million sounds incredibly high, and not many public institutions make money. So it does sound incredibly high, and I'm not entirely sure how reputable the TAB are as a source of financial information. So somewhat cautious about saying that as a matter of fact, but that's what I found. I doubt they're going to lie about it. That's a weird thing to lie about. So let's, for now, take it as gospel. That's how much money they made. But circling back on the topic of universities providing a lot of degrees, one of the things I decided to do was, I'm not going to list all the degrees I think are stupid, because frankly I'd be here all night and I don't want to do that. But what I decided to do was look at what were the worst performing degrees in terms of average income. And I took this from the Telegraph. And this, what they do is they took the average income after 5 years. And this was done in 2023. And number one was photography, was the worst performing university course. And the average income after 5 years was a whopping £24,200. Number two is translation, coming in at £24,581, and 3, criminology at £24,637. And then if we jump to number 10, because I'm not going to go through them all, was tourism management, and that was £26,555. So the top 3 worst performing degrees in the UK after 5 years don't even pay enough for you to repay your loan, to even start repaying your loan. So now you can start to see why the loans are not getting repaid in the UK. And even number 10, the best performing of the worst 10, is only 1,555 over the limit. So you'll not be paying a thing. I don't know what the percentage rate is, but it will be very, very little. Then I decided to look at some of the more quirky subjects that you can study here in the UK. Now there were a lot, but some of these were arguably degrees. So what I decided to do was filter them out in terms of ones that were actually honour degrees, which is kind of like the best type of degree you can get. So these were some of the ones that I found. So some of you are probably aware of this first one, gender studies. You can actually do gender studies as a master's, and I actually met someone who did gender studies. And this was I knew you could do it as a course, but I only thought it was really a course in America. I did not know you could do it in the UK, let alone as a master's degree. The next one was horology, which is the study of time. Slightly interesting in terms of, what that might entail, but an honours degree, not sold on that. Hand embroidery, interesting. The psychology of fashion. Communications, just communications. I didn't look into it. I don't actually know what communications mean. At first I thought maybe it was like, telecommunications, which is quite scientific, I think. But no, I think it's just communications. And I really have no idea what that means. But it was odd. Puppetry design and performance. So like sock puppets, but you sort of hang them from the strings and you dance. And believe it or not, you can actually do a master's degree in stand-up comedy at the University of Kent, of all places. Kent, probably the most unfunny upper middle class place in the UK. I don't know a single funny person who's come out of Kent, and maybe that's why, because they're trying to make Kent be known as a funny place. But yeah, just a bit of that was a bit of tongue-in-cheek humour, but it does highlight what I mean about universities providing so many degrees, and in some extreme examples really stupid degrees that people will actually go into debt for. This is the crazy thing. Not only are these degrees being offered, they're actually offered to the point where enough people are studying them for the university to keep them open, and they're going into loads of debt to study stand-up comedy. If you need to go to university to study stand-up comedy, unfortunately, you are probably not funny enough. But anyway, I tried looking for a statistic on the number of students who don't actually use their degree in their place of work. This one was difficult to find, and I didn't actually find anything. But I did find an article that essentially said that, and this is from The Independent, that only half of all UK graduates are working in a field that relates to their degree after leaving university, according to new research published today. In addition, 96% said they had switched careers by the time they were 24. Now, this is quite an old article. There was nothing else of late that I could find, weirdly. And the other thing about it is that this was only a study of 2,000 students. So not a wide range of students. But I think we can all probably guess that statistic is probably still quite similar. I personally know of plenty of people who have gone to university, they've studied a degree that you would probably guess they weren't going to do anything in it anyway, and there aren't that many jobs. And now they don't, work a job that is remotely similar to that degree. A few examples of that. I think the most just off the top of my head, I could be wrong, but the most I recall people saying they're studying this and they don't end up doing that as a degree is psychology. It's just one of those ones where, I'm doing psychology or like sociology or like psychology and sociology, and then they don't want to do it as a master's because they don't like it, and then they end up doing something completely different. And you kind of look at them and think, yeah, you saw that coming, but obviously you're not going to shoot down anyone's aspiration because that's their life. Another one that I have sort of recalled that people studying but never really following through with it was sports management and science or something like that. Again, how many jobs are really in that industry? I don't know. But a lot of people did it, and a lot of those people are now no longer working in that field, unsurprisingly. And then, of course, you now have, or what you'll have is, once students go into their first jobs, they finish university, they've got their first job, they'll go into the workplace, and what they'll find is that their university degree probably is very useless. Again, this is not the blanket rule. This doesn't apply to everything. Obviously, if you've done a medicine degree, an engineering degree, a biology degree, something like a STEM degree, then this doesn't apply. So this is not one rule fits all. However, for the vast majority of students who are not doing a STEM degree, if you did a business degree, possibly even an economics degree, you'll go into this job and it will be like you're starting from scratch all over again, because, and the employees will probably tell you this as well, that whatever you did at university isn't relevant anymore. You don't need to know about this. You start from scratch, and that's the funny thing. You go to university to upskill, to do better, so once you come to the workplace, and you start from scratch, which is fine, which makes sense because you don't know about the job. But the stupid thing is, you start from scratch the same way someone who didn't have a university degree would also start from scratch. There's no difference whatsoever. And that's the ridiculous thing. If you're going to go into a job and you're going to start from, point one, you don't know anything. That's their approach. I have to teach you everything. Where is the benefit of going to university? And how does that actually, from an employer's perspective, how does that actually separate you from the other person who maybe didn't go to university? Now, different things can be said for this, because the argument is, university can be seen as, you've put work in for the 3 years, you've elevated your knowledge, your understanding, you're smarter because of it. I guess that would be the argument for university, to be made for university. And is that really true? I'm not so sure. If you consider maybe a student who worked a random office job for 3 years, and then you compare it to a student who went to university, what have they really learned in university that means that they're more accomplished than the person who worked? Probably nothing. On paper, they're supposed to learn a lot, but in my experience, from what I studied, especially at my undergraduate, not so much my master's, but my undergraduate, and a lot of other people who did undergraduate degrees, nothing separates you from someone who just worked in an office. I think there is a misconception that there probably isn't really a misconception about this, because I think a lot of people now know that university students are not that intelligent. Not that they're not intelligent, but they're no more intelligent than your average person. So if you were hypothetically an employer, it's what really, apart from it's just the fact that that's what employers do, like that's just the thing we do. What is the real benefit of hiring a university student versus a non-university student? And what is the real benefit from the student's perspective of even going to university? In my opinion, the idea of university as now being used, not in its intended purpose, but how we've now altered the university system, is completely outdated. It's completely obsolete. It doesn't do what it aims to set out, to help the student elevate, to make them a better employee, because the student is none the wiser or none the smarter for the most part, and they're actually in debt. And so you'll start, and then of course you'll start from scratch. The other thing, this isn't really as much of, you can't really compare this as much, but I think it's probably worth saying anyway. You'll need to do professional exams, right? So you've done university, you've done 3 years, 4 years of exams. You go into work, you start from scratch as if you don't know anything, like anyone else would who didn't go to university. You learn how to do the job, and then you need to do professional exams anyway. So it's those professional exams. Obviously, not all jobs will have professional exams, but for the jobs that do, you've got these upcoming professional exams, which you may have touched on in university, but this is where they expect you to do the learning about the job. So it completely eradicates the usefulness of university. Those 3 years, useless. The way I see it, And I think the way society subconsciously views university is just 3 years of enjoy your life. This is what everyone does. Have 3 years of enjoyment and then go off. Because if anyone, sees university as a practical means to elevate yourself, I think you will be sorely disappointed and maybe slightly naive. But of course, I have to reiterate this again. This does not apply to every single university degree. As the statistics showed before, there are some degrees that have done a lot better than others. And there are degrees that don't cost people money, don't cost the state money, and by virtue of people, and it benefits them. So, but when I say it's a bit of a waste, I'm talking about the majority of these degrees where you could have done without them and still ended up in the same place. And there is a noticeable difference between, I think, students who've done subjects like STEM subjects and those who haven't. Even, obviously, on paper, there's a big difference because those are the ones who are the engineers, the doctors, working in finance, working in other businesses, some businesses anyway, working in science. And then the ones who just did a run-of-the-mill university course. You can tell, I think. Some people will carry that and think they're better than others because they simply, I studied this and I do this. And there is that sort of funny, sort of bragging rights, but it's sort of also just like a stereotype that, for example, if someone does law, they'll always tell you they did law. Or how do you know a doctor's studying medicine? Because he'll tell you. But it is noticeable. And people who do those STEM subjects will, as we've seen statistically, will be better off than those who do something a bit more random. So people who studied STEM, this is not directed at you. You're safe from this roasting. So now that the problems have been highlighted, what are the solutions? If you're going to point out the problems, give us some solutions, right? Luckily, I have some. I think because the problem effectively lies in the fact that there are too many degrees. Degrees are it's to the point where they are becoming useless. You need to change the incentive for people to go to university, or not the incentive for people to go, the incentive for people to think about university. And how do you make people actually consider the cost? Well, effectively, you actually have to make them pay for it, not this stupid loan repayment scheme where 75% won't repay it in full. So, effectively, the way I see it, and this is how it is in the UK and also in the US, government loans, the availability of government loans creates the problem of too many degrees. How does that, how does that make sense? I think I touched on this before. Governments provide loans to students. The universities, knowing this, will increase the number of students they take in, but also increase the number of courses so they can take more students in, so they can get more money, so they can spend it on God knows what. But in that process, they are providing courses that don't need to be studied, courses that you do not need to study to go to university. Or if you do, you don't need to put yourself in £45,000 worth of debt to do it. So the issue, I think, primarily is the government loans. If you remove those government loans, what would happen is, one, the cost of university would drop dramatically. Two, the number of courses studied would also drop dramatically because universities would quickly realise that, and I think they know this anyway, but it's the money thing they care about. They would stop providing the courses because no one's taking them, because why would I take that? Because I actually have to pay for this course myself, and it's obviously not going to help me. Studying stand-up comedy really is not going to get me a job. If I'm going to be a stand-up comic, then I need to just be funny. You don't need to study to be funny. You can't study to be funny. And then, as such, they shrink the size of the courses. Students reassess going to university, and the likely outcome is less students will go to university. So you might argue, well, why is that a good thing? All you're doing is reducing the size of people going to university. But what would happen is that to capture that workforce, other things would come up that would provide another way for students to get jobs. So, as I've mentioned before, apprenticeships would be, you'd see a massive increase in apprenticeships, or people getting into businesses another way. Because, just because all of a sudden you get rid of universities, that means businesses are going to stop hiring people. No, not at all. It just means that they will just provide another gateway for them to get these jobs, and as if you needed to go to university anyway to get the job. Because, if you think like in the finance industry, for example, they don't just hire people who studied finance. They hire people from a number of different things, where there could be a language, could be a science, could be history. So it's certainly not necessary. So anyway, the size of the courses would shrink, and this would be good. And as well, overall, young people would be better off. As we've already seen, young people would be financially better off if they didn't go to university. So it's the only stakeholder that really misses out here would be the university itself, because they get less money and they're less competitive, and that's not what they want. They want more money. So they would definitely be the loudest voices who were opposed to this, because they're missing out on a lot of money. And then you would also have the added benefit, and I guess this is where a lot of people would disagree, but you'd also have the added benefit of all these crazy ideas in universities and these crazy movements. They would just quickly die out, because that's the only reason these are there, is because these ridiculous courses are being taught, and it's attracting loads of students, and these crazy communist ideas are being spoken about, trying to rewrite history, this mob mentality of 1 + 1 is 3, and those will quickly die out as well. And what you would have is the funny thing is, I think what you would find is that you get rid of a lot of these silly courses in universities, you reduce the size of the course, and you probably have a smarter bunch of people and a wealthier bunch of people, because they've got more money in their pocket and they're not listening to these ridiculous political ideas that are being thrown around. Obviously, you want people to have a way to express their own ideas. That's fine. Never against the idea of freedom of speech and freedom of thought and the freedom to teach. All good, but left to a competitive environment, these courses would die out, because people know that they're not going to make any money. They're going to look at university as a practical sense, as opposed to what many people view it, just as a way to have 3 years of fun and meet people, etc. And then, as I said, the better option would be companies would it would encourage companies to provide more apprenticeships, and who knows, maybe even another way of hiring on. So obviously, apprenticeships will start after secondary school. Students could they could go straight in, but maybe because businesses want to get the best talent early, maybe then they'll start coming into schools before the students finish, and seeing that as an opportunity, teachers might go, right, well, if these these businesses are coming to school, why don't we start teaching about, it could be finance, engineering, medicine, a lot more earlier on. So you get, from a younger age, these students are getting better, more relevant experience, and teaching, more importantly, from a younger age, preparing them for the workforce. I mean, this is all very hypothetical, pure speculation, but you can see how the changes would take place if it were to change. Now, one could argue, what if they just went abroad? And the answer to that is, well, why don't they go abroad now? And there are different reasons for that. There are a number of quotas they have to fill. Getting a visa is a lot harder and a lot more expensive. So that question's really a null and void question. And you may think, well, this is just your opinion, this is just, completely hypothetical, but in fact, I actually recently read an article, and it was saying that, you find it on Google, that businesses are now reassessing their requirements in America, their requirements for university students. And, of course they are, because they're realizing they're hiring these students, and they're coming out of university, and they are none the wiser than other people who maybe didn't go. You come in and you think, well, what are you actually studying if you know nothing? Of course, you're not supposed to know about the day-to-days of the job, but you don't know anything. What are they teaching you there? And it's interesting because I've also spoken to people before who are well achieved in the finance industry, and one of the things they've said is they don't actually look at a good university favorably because people will try and rely on those merits of, oh, well, I went to this university and I studied this. And the reality is and this is definitely the case in an industry like finance, someone who's gone to university and studied whatever, a finance degree versus someone who's worked their way up from a young age, they are going to get completely outcompeted, the university student. But they have the arrogance to think that they are better because they went to a top school. And of course, a lot of businesses now are catching on to this. Like, they're thinking, well, there's no benefit to this really. And if anything, what you could do is once you hire a graduate, you pay them a salary. But if you start them younger off, you pay them a lower salary because they're younger and they don't know anything. But then you increase it every year, and by the time they come to university, they are by the time they are of university age, working in the business, they are so much more achieved, so much more knowledgeable, and they're earning there's so much more money than they would have been if they'd come straight out of university. So, from a young person's perspective, you're earning more money at the age, and you have less debt. You have so much less debt. Now, this is in America. Or at least this is the article was saying in America. Probably not the case in the UK. And obviously in America, as we all know, the debt's even more. I'm not fully aware of the system, how it works in America. But interestingly, I also saw an article from CNN Business, and it said that. The article's not from CNN. There was another article I was going to reference afterwards, but this article from medium.com, but if you search half of US companies plan to ditch bachelor degree requirements for jobs in 2024. So that's the name of the article, and that's the plan. And some of the names of the businesses who have stated their intention to do that include Walmart, IBM, Accenture, Bank of America, and Google. So these are big names, and these big names are now appreciating the fact that you don't need to have a university degree to get a job here, because you're not learning anything. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of your time. Probably somehow it's a waste of their time, and we can source good talent in a different way. And of course, what have they replaced that with? Well, looking at the article, it says Accenture has launched an apprenticeship program in 2016 and hired 1,200 people. About 80% of those hired joined the company without a college degree. Now, this specific article was written by someone called Donya Ruzbehi, and underneath the title, she says nearly 50% of companies in the US plan to devalue the college degree. As if it hadn't been devalued by the absolute nonsense that's coming out of it anyway. No, this is going to devalue the college degree. The fact that the businesses aren't going to require them to go to university anymore. So instead of, maybe making it financially better off for the students, it's bad for the college degree. As if this is like some being who has to pay for things, who can feel and who eats and sleeps. No, a college degree is not a sentient being, but a person paying for that, the parents saving up their whole life for that, that's who it really impacts. So in the US, strides are already being taken to reassess the importance of a degree, and rightly so, because as we know, or people maybe outside of the US know, and obviously people in the US know, the cost of a degree there is astronomical. It's significantly higher than what it is in the UK. I don't even know what the average would be, but I do know that it wouldn't be peculiar to find a university that costs, for 3 years in the UK, 1 year in the US, $40,000 a year, which is just incredible. But I was reading an article on CNN Business, and this is the article I was trying to reference before, and it says the following, and when it's talking about university degrees: it wasn't always this way. After adjusting for currency inflation, college tuition has increased 747% since 1963. And between 1980 and 2020, the average price of tuition, fees, room, and board for an undergraduate degree increased by 169%, according to a report from the Georgetown University Center on Education and Workforce. That far outpaces wage increases. Yeah, absolutely. That's probably the largest increase in the cost of any public utility or service provided ever. There's nothing that's more expensive than that. And why do you think that is? What could possibly be pushing the universities to charge this much money? And it will be the same. It'll be the fact they know that students can get loans, so they'll push up the prices massively, and they'll charge an arm and a leg for that. It also says that over the same 40-year period, earnings for workers aged 22 to 27 only increased by 19%. If that statistic doesn't tell you that the university system is completely broken, I don't know what else would. So coming back over the pond, that was just a small, because obviously college in America is probably even more of a thing than it is in the UK. Parents save up their whole lives. They have like college funds, and college in America is very glorified. They've got these college sports and these massive stadiums and what do you call them? Fraternities and sororities. It's a big thing, and these universities are like the size of towns in the UK in terms of the number of people that go there. They're huge. So it's a big thing, and we're seeing there first that they're making these changes. But I saw another article recently, another one by The Guardian. I'm a changed man, folks. Another one by The Guardian, but it was basically they're reporting on a report that was done by the Institute of Fiscal Studies. Now, before I get into this, obviously one of the main talking points in terms of finance the past 2 years has been the fact that interest rates have gone up massively, and that's due to inflation. Now, I'm not going to get into that. That'll be a topic for another time, but essentially we've needed to increase rates to try and battle inflation. So we've needed to stop government spending because that's what caused inflation. And we've done that by increasing the interest rates. Now, having higher interest rates is good for people who save money because it means they get more interest on their savings. It's bad for people who borrow money because it means they have to pay off their debt at a higher interest rate. So instead of paying 1% on your loan, you're paying, I think it's like 5-6% on a loan. So it's a massive increase. And from the report by the IFS, they found that student loans in England are expected to cost the government an extra £11 billion a year as a consequence of higher interest rates. Which is, again, so it's obviously increased the cost of borrowing. So again, without any of the information that I've spoken about in terms of university fees, some may wonder, well, why is it costing the government money? Surely it should cost the borrowers more because they're the ones borrowing the money. But of course, the government are giving them the loan. So, well, where are the government getting the money from? Well, the government are borrowing the money. So interest rates have gone up and the government is paying more money on the debt that they're borrowing to give to students so that they can borrow money, which they will not pay back, likely. And on that, not paying back, the IFS said that the huge additional cost of this, the 11 billion cost, was not even reflected in the government's official measures of the cost of student loans. So this means that the loss of more than 10 billion is not even being captured in official figures. So as a side note, by the way, this should ring some alarm bells in your head, because, if they're not reporting this, what else are they not reporting? And how much debt are we actually in as a country? If that's 10 billion, 11 billion pounds not being, or they've just, for whatever reason, they've decided not to report it. Well, what the hell else are we not reporting? Anyway, what I think is also quite interesting about this as well, is that in the past, and this touches on what I was talking about before, in the past, the government has lost money on loans. So whenever there are loans that are not fully repaid, 75% roughly, the government loses money on those loans, but they make profit on the loans that are repaid. But with the increase in the cost of borrowing through interest rates, the IFS says that the government is likely to make substantial losses on even those loans that are repaid in full, because the interest rates on government debt is that much higher on student loans. So no matter what you do, you going to university is going to cost the taxpayer money. No matter what you do. You pay it off, you don't pay it off, it's going to cost. If you don't pay it off, it's just going to cost a lot more. And for those of you who may not know, this country is very, very broke. I mean, there's no money. There's so much debt. The debt just keeps on increasing every year. So by cutting down on universities would actually be helping the economy, and maybe put that money elsewhere, because we're racking up such a bill that soon our debt will be, certainly in my lifetime, our debt will be 100% of our GDP. I'm sure of it, because they'll continue borrowing money. We'll never pay it off. We can never pay it off at this point. The only way to do it would be to seriously cut back on our spending, try and cut back on our taxes to, boost the economy, encourage investment, but that'll never happen. The governments now, they've passed that laissez-faire a long, long time ago. It's all about central control now. But again, that is a topic for another time. Just, a final remark on universities, maybe just to conclude this episode. So obviously, what I've done is I've highlighted the flaws of university from a practical sense, with a few statistics here. I think it's important for people if people do listen to this, and whether it's now or in the future, and they are considering university, of course, I think maybe what you need to do is you need to look at university more holistically, as opposed to just a financial cost. Even though, I've said you should do, that also shouldn't be the only thing you look at. If you can afford to go to university, and I think this is the important thing. I think this is the important thing for a lot of people. This is where maybe people would disagree, but it's simple. If you can afford to go to university, and more importantly, you're going to study something that will statistically benefit you, then you should. But, even if you don't, and you can afford to go to university and just doss around for 3 years, which is what a lot of people do, university is a great way to make friends, to make good experiences. University is one of those things it is how you make it. If you want to make it fun, you can have a lot of fun. If you want to be serious, it can be serious, and you can, be top of your class, and that'll bode really well for you, and if you want to doss about, you can doss about, because it really is up to you. But I think for me, it's not really tailored for anyone. It's tailored for everyone to listen to. No one specifically. But if you're in the unfortunate position where money is a lot more scarce for you and your family, you might want to reconsider university, because you do not need to go to university to get a job. Now, if you want to study medicine, okay, yes, you do. That's fine. And that's totally acceptable, because that's the route you need to go down. If you're looking at university from simply, I don't know what to do, so I'm going to go to university, and you don't have, it would be a struggle for you to go in your family. Maybe you shouldn't go, right? And people will say the idea of a government loan is that it allows people to go to university so that they can, that's fine, it's affordable for everyone. But university doesn't need to be for everyone. It's not for everyone. That's the point. University is not for everyone. So if you don't need to go, if there is not a need for you to go to university, I would implore you to not go, because you will be financially worse off. The idea of the loan is, okay, you go to university so that you can upskill and you can be better off. You can escape the lower income. But as I've said, and this isn't just my spiel, me coming up with my own hypotheses, these are statistics. These are government statistics. These are facts. They're there. You are statistically not likely to be better off if you do not do a subject such as a STEM subject, such as economics, finance, whatever. So, do reconsider that. Seriously, have a proper sit down with your parents, show them the podcast, have them listen to it, see what they think, see what you think. Do some searches online about, universities and whatnot. One thing I would completely ignore would be things like the complete university guide, or student satisfaction, or university rankings. They mean nothing. University rankings count for zip. Why? Because first of all, they change every year, and so what? The university's ranked number 1 in the UK, okay, and it could be for your subject that it's really not. Now, obviously, it's ranked via subject as well, but I went to for my master's, I went to, that year it was ranked the top accounting school in the UK, and I wouldn't have thought so. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't particularly anything stand out. So ignore that completely. And they're also skewed by the fact a lot of these university overall rankings, it's actually based on the research they do, not the teaching standards. That's another thing. The rankings are based, I'll say that again, the rankings are based off of the research they do, not the teaching standards. So the research has nothing to do with what you will learn at all. That'll be separate, how the university really makes their money. So ignore those. Do your own research. If any of the questions from this come into your mind, have a look online, see if you can find anything. That's how you make your decision. That's how you will be financially better off. Yeah, you'll miss out on a few years of fun, but overall, and you can make fun other ways, but overall, you will be much better off. So that is the final thing I'll say on that topic, and that concludes episode number 2. But before we do finish, there is one thing I want to add, because this has been in the news recently. Not major news, to be honest. There's a lot of other things that have been going on, but it sort of relates to what I've been saying. So recently, Harvard University, one of the top universities in the UK, in the world. Sorry, it's not in the UK. It's in America. She was the shortest serving Harvard president ever. And why was she the shortest? Because she was sacked for plagiarism on at least 5 different accounts, probably more. Now, for those of you who don't know what plagiarism is, it's effectively copying someone's work. In an academic sense, in academics, it's the highest offence you can do. Okay, if someone who's doing research publishes some findings and you copy them, and you don't give them references, so when you reference something, it means that you're acknowledging what they did and you're clearly stating this is from them. You lie and you say it's your own work. That's plagiarism. In university, that is the highest. It's an academic offence, and you will quite possibly, very possibly, be kicked out of the university as a student. They'll kick you out because it's the worst, one of the worst academic offences you can do. So this Harvard president, so she's in charge of Harvard University, one of the best universities in the world, and she was sacked because it came to light that she plagiarized multiple people. So you would think the decent thing to do in that case would just step down and say, yep, I was wrong. Even though I'm in this position, and I knew it was wrong when I was doing it, but I decided to do it anyway. I was wrong, and I apologize. But of course, she came out on the defensive, and instead of just admitting she was wrong, she actually claimed that her sacking was a campaign against her. It was a personal attack on her. But not only was it a personal attack on her, her being sacked for plagiarism was, and I quote, a war against public faith in pillars of American society. So, public faith in pillars of American society isn't being honest and having integrity about your academic work. Calling it out, that's a war against it. And this is very typical, and I think this probably happens a lot more. These academics, they're in these positions, and they're the biggest hypocrites ever. This lady was on $800,000 a year. Now, of course, why the hell would you want to not get sacked from that job? You try and keep that job because that's a very well-paying job. But also, it makes you wonder, why are Harvard professors getting paid that much money? That is an obscene amount of money for someone to work in university. So she lied and she came out on the defensive about it. And a lot of other people have now come out and have started to defend her by effectively trying to change the definition of what plagiarism is. So one of the things that I saw that was getting a lot of traction on X was that plagiarism isn't plagiarism if it's done unintentionally. Only if it's done with intent does it count as plagiarism. Now, of course, how do you prove that plagiarism is intentful if you're reading a piece of paper? You're not going to record a transcript and say, ha ha ha, they'll never know that I plagiarized this, those fools. No, I mean, how would you ever prove that otherwise? And again, it just circle back to the whole folly of university. These people, they're paying themselves big money, and it's a way for them to protect themselves. They want to earn the big bucks, and it's a joke. If that was a student, they'd be gone straight away. They'd be sacked, not sacked. They'd be kicked out of university. But because she's a Harvard professor, that was it. She wanted to do a redo. So no, don't worry, no consequences for you. You can just redo it all again, and we'll just ignore that. We'll brush that under the carpet, swept under the rug. No, absolutely not. She got her comeuppance, rightly so, and she's trying to fight it. Hopefully to no avail, because that's just disgusting behaviour. If students can't do it, and why should they do it? You can't copy someone's work. You certainly can't do it either, especially someone in your position. So anyway, that was just a bit of news to reinforce my overall claim that university, folks, is a scam. That's how I view it. If I could do it again, I wouldn't. I would go down a different route, knowing the options that I know now. And I implore anyone listening to also do the same.